I'd like to welcome you to this special panel session. With more than half of the world's population in cities, we are now essentially urban. And an important part of advancing sustainability is going to be revitalizing these urban communities and making them more resilient, whether this is to economic shocks or climate change impacts. This is going to depend largely on fundamental shifts in our energy systems. Clean, secure, and affordable energy has been the national mantra on energy for the last 40 some odd years. The energy system is cleaner and more efficient than in the early 1970s, but we still rely on fossil fuels for over 70% of total installed operating electrical generating capacity in the United States and for about 80% of energy use worldwide. The vast resources of oil and natural gas in the United States that are now accessible at competitive prices make the shift toward cleaner renewables harder to realize. But pressure on climate mitigation may be, or rather should be, the compelling force that drives a serious policy shift. The latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Fifth Assessment Report makes clear that we're committed to human-induced climate change. President Obama's Climate Action Plan sets forth a national agenda for dealing with it. And Governor Cuomo's actions under the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and a host of other initiatives all make New York State into a leader in this domain. All these things indicate that climate mitigation is a very serious policy objective. So now there's hope for a transition in the energy system because limiting the effects of climate change means driving greenhouse gas emissions nearly to zero over the next several decades. Is this a transition? Is this transition going to set one of the most sweeping shifts in the energy system we've seen? What are the opportunities? What are the impediments? I'm really pleased that today we have Governor Cuomo's new energy team to answer these vexing questions, to explain a little bit about their initiatives in regulating, in innovation programs, in finance, and leading us towards a more clean energy future. It's my pleasure to introduce them. I will first introduce the panel and then invite Jill Anderson from our sponsor, New York Power Authority, to come up. Richard Kaufman is the chairman of Energy and Finance for Governor Cuomo. He was appointed to this post in February of 2013, and this past summer he was appointed as the chairman of the chairman of the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, SYRCoE. He was formerly with the Secretary Chu at the Department of Energy as a senior advisor. He spent most of his career in the private sector as a chief executive officer of Good Energies Incorporated, a leading investor in renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies. John Rhodes, to my right, was appointed by the President and Chief Executive Officer of NYSERDA just a month ago. He brings more than 30 years of experience in business with a focus on financial and energy industries. He's lived and worked internationally. Prior to this appointment, he served as the Director for Market Innovation at the Natural Resources Defense Council. He also, before joining NRDC, he spent 3 years as the Chief Operating Officer at Good Energies. And then to Richard's right is Audrey Zibelman, who is the chair of the New York State Public Service Commission. She has extensive experience in the public, private, and not-for-profit energy and electricity sectors. She's recognized as a national and international expert in energy policy, markets, and smart grid innovation. And I welcome you all today. And I'd like to introduce Jill Anderson, the Chief of Staff and Director of Energy Policy at NYPA, who is our sponsor for today's lunch. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry, and thank you for the opportunity to address you. As Sherry said, I'm the Director of Energy Policy at NYPA, which means that I have the privilege of working with the team here and others in government who are leading energy policy initiatives. And I find that working in policy in New York is especially rewarding because it's so quick that we're able to turn policy ideas into real actions and actually see changes in our industry. And I just want to mention one example that we can look at just from this year. Earlier this year, Governor Cuomo announced the Build Smart New York program, which is an initiative to reduce energy consumption in state buildings by 20% in the next 7 years. After that program was announced, the New York Power Authority trustees created the Energy Efficiency Market Acceleration Program, or we call it EEMAP. And under that umbrella, we've started partnerships with universities and the private sector. Specifically, we're working here with the Syracuse Center of Excellence. And our initiatives will be to take promising new technologies and use that opportunity created by the initiative to reduce consumption in state buildings to implement new technologies in those public sector, and then do measurement and verification to bring those technologies to the next step of commercialization. And that's just one example of a policy that was really just an idea this time last year that went quickly to an executive order and now into implementation, where we have projects already under construction around the state that are going towards achieving those goals. And so you're going to hear from the leaders on the stage here about this policy and about many others that are really shaping energy in New York and moving us towards our aggressive goals for a cleaner energy economy. Thank you.
So now, Richard Kaufman.
Thanks, Sherry, and thanks, Jill, and NYPA for helping to sponsor this event. It's really a great pleasure for us to be here. This is the first time, I think, that Audrey, John, and I have been together in public. So it's a big event for us, and so we're really happy to be here. Just want to start with just the basics, which is that Governor Cuomo is committed to clean energy. And New York has been long a leader in clean energy, but we want to do more. And it was for that reason that I was very pleased to get a call to return to New York, which is where I live, from Washington, to take on the responsibility of seeing what we could do to move faster. And I have to say, in light of the events in Washington over the last couple of weeks, I'm really glad I got the call. So the energy leadership team has been spending the last several months outlining policies to take New York to the next stage of leadership. And our leadership in energy has been augmented by the appointments of Chair Ziebelman and John Rhodes as President and CEO of NYSERDA, and it adds to the team that we already have in place at NYPA, Gil Quinones and Tom Congdon, who's here in the room as well. So we've done a lot, actually, in the last several months. We're going to talk about the $1 billion green bank that the governor announced at the last State of the State and where we stand on that. In the last several months, we've restructured LIPA, and we've proposed changes for the energy efficiency program, and we have a proposal on our solar support to the Public Service Commission. And so while we're embarked upon a bunch of change, I think it's important to note that the changes that we're proposing are changes in tactics, not changes in policy objectives. And what underlies the changes that we have begun to make and the changes you're going to see in the future are about half a dozen principles. And I'd like to just quickly go through them. So the first principle is we want to do more and we want to move faster. We're not getting the economic value of the clean economy that we want, and we're not making the progress against emissions reductions that we need to take. We're at the one-year anniversary of Sandy, which reminds us that business as usual is just not acceptable. Second principle is about markets. We want markets to work better. I'm a markets person by background, and we know that market forces are powerful, and by harnessing them, we can do more. And by definition, if market forces work perfectly, there'd be no need for government. But there are market failures and gaps, and we want to look at where the instruments of government, through administrative or legislative action, through its power of convening, or through use of government financial resources, can act to remove these market gaps. 3, we want to encourage innovation to achieve better value and choice for customers. Change is occurring in the electric industry on every front, from declining solar prices and storage and electric vehicles and lighting, windows, building systems, and combined heat and power units. Some of the stuff is outside here. And it's not just in hardware, it's in software, and you can go on. You know this as well as I do. So change is also taking place in how individuals and communities feel about taking more control over their energy futures. The next principle is what matters is the customer's total bill, not just rates. We pay our electric bills, not just components of it. And we have some of the highest bills in the country. The next principle is that we want to leverage ratepayer funds beyond grants and subsidies wherever it makes sense. So to be clear, I'm not talking about an end to grants and subsidies, but how we can leverage grants and subsidies better. 6, the state can't dictate the future. Given the changes occurring rapidly, we need to set rules, appropriate price signals, and economic incentives for what we want to achieve, and then let market participants operate. And the last principle, which is principle 7, is we've got to hear from market participants, because none of the things I've talked about work unless there's a feedback loop that comes from the markets. We need to hear from market participants. We want to hear what's going on in the market, what's working, what's not. We also want to hear win-win ideas that you have, ones that are good for the taxpayer and good for your sector. For example, what are things that the state can do to improve routes to market? What can we do to reduce customer acquisition costs? What are the market barriers in your sector, and how can the government, through its regulatory, executive, and convening tools, help alleviate them? So I've been accused of, as a frustrated academic, I've been accused of giving out this homework assignment, so I'm giving it out again. And so I really hope that we can, given that midterms are over and, you know, Thanksgiving break, I'm really hoping that we can get some responses to this homework assignment. So we will talk about many of some of the things that we're doing in detail, but with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Sherry and Jill. Thank you, Audrey, in advance. Good morning, or good afternoon, and welcome. I am John Rhodes, president of SYRCoE. Let me begin by giving you the briefest introduction to my organization. SYRCoE is a public benefit corporation with a mission to advance alternative energy solutions in ways that improve New York's economy and environment. And what that means is that our mission is to spur innovation and investment in this clean energy sector. And we know this can work. Studies published, among others, by the U.S. Council on Competitiveness and by the National Academy of Sciences have shown that technology creates economic growth, and SYRCoE is working with our partners to spur that growth and an innovation-based economy in New York. This state has all of the key ingredients to seize the opportunity. Smart energy and environmental policies, outstanding academic institutions, tremendous R&D assets, a robust capital investment marketplace, big Fortune 500 companies entering the market, and smaller entrepreneurs breaking into the market, all the ingredients necessary for this economy. And the governor is committed to seizing this opportunity. We've talked about the tremendous assets that we have. It's also clear that more needs to be done to create an environment where commercialization of clean energy technology can flourish in this state. Many of the organizations that we work with in the state, many of the organizations in this room, are as committed to this goal as we are, the governor and NYSERDA, and I think it just underscores a strong point of common interest. Syracuse here has been the center of some of our great collaborations. We worked with NYPA on Executive Order 88 and Build Smart New York. We have the Clean Tech Center incubator located here, and one of the key incubators funded by us, and multiple engagements in Syracuse and around here: Clarkson, Onondaga County, Greener Greater Communities Plan, SUNY ESF, SUNY Upstate Medical, St. Joseph's, and of course, Syracuse University. In keeping with our track record of leadership and our commitment to the governor's agenda, we're adapting to changes in the sector. You're familiar with many of the changes. Some of them are external. We've got technology advances that are changing what is economic and what is even what is possible. We've got utility executives that are discussing the transformation of their business model as deployment and decision-making become more distributed, whether they call it Utility 2.0 or something else. You're probably also familiar with some of the changes underway in the state. We've established the Green Bank in New York to achieve more leverage and multiples of the investment that we've been able to put to work in this sector to date. We have an invigorated New York Sun program in solar. You've heard our principles from Richard, and what they do is they create some clear common themes for the work for NYSERDA, as with all of the entities that are working to advance the governor's energy agenda, including Public Services Commission and DPS, including NYPA, including the folks working on Long Island. And the model is kind of a continuous commissioning with upgrade model. We're going to keep doing what we're doing, but we're going to make it better, and we're going to make adjustments. But the common themes are more impact from ratepayer funds, more working with and through markets, more working with and through partners, our government colleagues, utilities, channels, customers, all while continuing to improve the effect of current programs that support renewables, energy efficiency deployment, and technology and market development. And when we say support, we mean not support just for support's sake, but support as a bridge to a future where you can carry this work on without us, and we'll go on to new frontiers. So you can expect us to continue to explore and develop new approaches, attacking gaps and barriers that the market isn't solving yet, in technology, in finance, in business models, and with engaging fully the energy consumers and markets in this work. So we're going to address the market barriers for tried and true technologies, and we're going to accelerate the path to market for the technologies that are still working to commercialization. We need your help. We need every bit of innovation and leadership from you and your peers throughout the state. And we thank you for your work and openness and dialogue with us on it. Collectively, we have already accomplished a tremendous amount, and we can accomplish much, much more. And on behalf of NYSERDA, I thank you.
Hi, and so let me add and for behalf of the Commission, the Department of Public Service. We appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I would say that the group was back together again, but actually this is our first time. So, but we expect to be on tour a lot together. So what I'd like to do, as you know, the Department of Public Service and the Commission is responsible for the regulation of the utilities, as well as helping administer a number of the different programs. What I was appreciative of the fact is that this is a center of excellence for energy and environmental systems. And I think, what you guys are going to be talking about in the next day or so is really the creation of what I call the system of systems. Because one of the things that we understand about the electricity system is that it is a fully integrated system, and that everything that happens on the grid, whether it's on the consumer side or on the supply side, affects everything else. And like every other system, it's going to work best when it works together and it works in a way that's efficient and aligned from all ends of the system. But the other thing, and I think that's what's so transformational, is that we're at a point in time where we're actually changing and fundamentally rethinking this system. Because when we first built it up, what we thought is that, and it was true at the time, that the best way to produce electricity that's efficient is to build central station generation plants along with transmission and distribution. And out of that, you would get economies of scale and scope, and from that, you would help drive the cost down of electricity. We're at a point now where we recognize that, that there are other opportunities. And so what's changing is what we used to think about is that the demand side, the customer side of the equation, as something which was largely inelastic, that really what all customers cared about was getting a reliable electricity is no longer true. Is that price matters, resiliency matters, quality of service matters, the type of products they have matter. And what we have the opportunity to do now is to rethink the system so that rather than thinking about the customer as just the payee, is we really start to think about customers as an active part of the system itself, what we call the prosumer in telecommunications, and is really the prosumer, is really thinking about it as both sides. What that suggests is that where we used to think about demand as the last resource, demand response as the last resource you use to create an efficient system, we now have the opportunity to think about distributed energy resources, controls, and all the various elements that we're talking about today as resources that can be used to optimize usage, and at the end is that you create a more resilient system, but you also create a system that is more efficient and low cost. So that to me is the most exciting part of being part of the industry today, is that we're at that point in time where we can really make a change, and we can make a change that makes a huge difference. Because one of the things that I had an opportunity to do when I was at PJM and then at Veridity is see that what we do in the US really matters not just here, but actually it matters internationally, because people will look at what we're doing and will look at these markets and look at us as thought leaders as to really thinking about how you make customers front and center. So with that, I think in line with those principles as to the types of things that the department and the commission will be thinking about as we go through this transformation. One is putting the customer front and center. So we are working with NYSERDA around looking at the Green Bank, but also modifying our energy efficiency programs to make it easier for customers, but also thinking about load as an active part of the grid, and how do you make that so that not only is it the good thing to do from environmental, but really demonstrates that it's the most economic thing we can do, is getting demand involved. The second is looking at markets and regulation. And when I spoke to Richard about this opportunity and we talked about it, I said, we can do everything we can want to do on technology, but if the markets are dumb or regulation is dumb, in other words, doesn't take into account the fact that you have this capability, then nothing will happen. So we'll be looking at what do we need to do to change the regulatory structure, and I'm always quick to say this is not a win versus lose situation. We regulated utilities in this, started in the 40s and 50s, around cost of service regulation, thinking that what we needed to do was build up infrastructure and give utilities basically an incentive to invest and invest efficiently. That makes terrific sense. But now we're saying something different, because we're talking about how do you operate the system to take account of load? How do you design markets so that load is compensated on the same way as supply side, so that the incentives are aligned? And one of the things that utility CEOs will all tell you is that all regulation is incentive regulation. The only question is, what behavior do you want to incent? And in this case, we're looking at how do we change it so we get full alignment from the high end to the low end, and make sure that everybody sees the outcome in a way that's beneficial, so that then the business models can get created and the markets can get created. The other is really focused on the downstream markets and understanding what are the real barriers and how do we help eliminate them. Because as Richard mentioned, our goal is not necessarily to pick the winners or losers. Our goal, and the goal of good regulation and good markets, is to identify artificial barriers to entry and get rid of them as quickly as possible, and we need to be thinking about that. And then the third piece is infrastructure. We are at a time with low gas prices, having people make some difficult economic decisions. We have generators that are no longer able to afford to stay in business. Some should, some shouldn't. But it's going to be very important to think about how we use this as an opportunity to get where we want to go. But there's no question that we'll need to have continued investment in all sorts of infrastructure, whether it's transmission, distribution, generation, distributed generation, and software to help pull it all together. So part of the Commission's role is to make sure that this infrastructure gets in and we create a stabilizing markets rather than destabilizing markets. So I look forward to working with all of you as a newcomer to the state, but a long-term person in this industry. I think New York is in a fabulous position to have both national and international leadership. We certainly have the brains and we certainly have the energy, and I think what you're seeing is that an opportunity to turn this all into a true benefit for the state. So thank you.
So thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, John. Since this is a sort of energy coming out party of sorts, I would like to get as quickly to the audience as possible. And what we're going to do is I'm going to ask one question of each of our speakers as a way of trying to segue into that conversation. Obviously, with a crowd this size, it's very difficult to have a one-table conversation, but in fact, that's what we're going to try to do and offer up an opportunity for you to talk to our group. So I'm going to address your first two principles, and then we'll get to the last one, which is the relationship with the public. The first two principles, not business as usual and getting the markets to work better, where you were talking about the invisible hand of the markets and how to make it a little bit less invisible. And my question to you is, in doing that, is how do you envision a framework that effectively moves that invisible hand to be a slightly more visible without picking winners in the deployment of technology world, and how do you see the move of a policy level playing field?
I want you to know that none of these questions were rehearsed. So I guess what I would say is that we have to start with what's in the market. I mean, I have only been in government a relatively short time, but I spent a lot of time in the private sector. And so I think that one of my observations about government is that sometimes government designs programs for things that ought to be there as opposed to what's really in the market. And so I think that if we're going to, and I'm very mindful that if government's going to get involved in the market, it has to not get in the way of the market or become the market. So I think and so I can think about When I was at DOE, one of my concerns about some of the grant programs the DOE provided is that they were building piers, not bridges. In other words, there's no connection between a grant and what would happen thereafter. So unless if you have only a demonstration with no plan for deployment, it's just a science project. And as one example. So when we think about the Green Bank, which we can talk more about, it starts as a first principle that where are the market gaps in financing, and then work with the private sector in areas where there are real companies making progress with real customers, but where there are limitations in their progress with customers relates to the lack of availability of financing. So that's a way where you're getting information from the market about market actions, and by defining the problem as one where, because there are market gaps, there's a lack of availability of financing, not the cost of financing. If that's really true, you take a green bank out of the business of being in the subsidy business and in the business of working with the private sector. And if these market barriers, and so the involvement of the green bank is in providing some type of credit enhancement or some kind of risk mitigation that can help a financial institution do more than it would otherwise do. Once a commercial market's established, then the green bank can step out of the way and markets can go on about itself. So it's certainly not picking winners and losers. It's about focusing in on where there are market gaps. And so it's that last principle I talked about. We have to be much more attuned to what's going on in the market and where there are market gaps.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. John, a little bit more detail, I think, would be helpful to the audience about how the green bank might operate and fill some of those gaps. And also a related question to that, which is a personal interest of mine, is I've always been in the business of thinking about, this whole notion that what gets measured gets done. And to the extent that we are thinking about the selection of new ideas and technologies and trying to fill those gaps, how are we actually going to use the data and information that will reside in a green bank to really understanding meeting our objectives for greenhouse gas emission reductions, and assuring in a more public way that we are actually making progress on the set of goals that we have set in motion. Because I think one of the biggest challenges that we face, and I certainly faced this when I was in government, is explaining to the public with data and with real numbers and with a real sense that we're making progress, what that's going to look like, and what role we can play in the universities and in our partnerships to help.
Well, thank you. The most important metric for the Green Bank, and I think we all applaud the philosophy of holding ourselves to outcomes and being measured by them. The most important metric for the Green Bank will be the investment that it enables in clean energy projects. And that number, we want that number to be big. The purpose of the Green Bank is to take Green Bank funds, leverage them up with funds from other entities, principally the private sector. So you get a multiple there. And then because the monies go out to the Green Bank and come back, they then get to be put to work again. And so you get another multiple there. So the most important thing we can do is to spur that investment by ourselves along with others through leverage and through a multiple. So that is the mechanic. The other corollary philosophy is that the Green Bank it's a bold new initiative, but in some ways it's just another tool. And it's just another tool to take the ratepayer funds and the other resources, rulemaking, et cetera, of the government and optimize them. And to the extent that we are achieving more impact in the Green Bank, we will optimize to capitalize on that. And to the extent that things aren't working, we will adjust the flows. So one of the operating principles of the Green Bank will be flexibility. Flexibility not to do what we feel like doing on any given day, but to respond to the results, the outcomes that we're achieving in terms of the economics. It also means that the programs that are NYSERDA now have a role in the future to work in a complementary fashion with the Green Bank. And some of that is, well, NYSERDA works in the market now, and we interact with many people in the room, and that interaction, that partnership, is one of the bases on which we are going to originate projects that will come to the Green Bank for financing. And by the way, it won't just be NYSERDA that's doing that. We have, friends and colleagues at NYPA, we have emerging structures on Long Island, which will all participate in that complementary agenda as well. And the final point I would make is that you've talked about metrics as an important bit of numerology to pay attention to. The other thing is that as we do more of this work as NYSERDA in its current incarnation, as NYPA with its Build Smart New York program that Jill talked about, as we fund things with the Green Bank, we're going to be generating data, and we're going to be generating, importantly, data about what works. And we've talked a lot in this extended conversation about why people don't do the things that we want them to do. Why don't people put solar on the rooftops? Why don't people deploy energy efficiency? And one of the fundamental reasons is they don't actually have confidence that they'll get the promised results. And so that one of the, I hesitate to call it a spillover or ancillary benefit, because it's a big deal, but one of the additional benefits of this approach, both of having the Green Bank and achieving greater investment, and also of having the different entities in the New York Energy team working much more in concert, is that we will be able to develop decision quality data that will give comfort to investors in any sector, and that will just reinforce the set of changes that we're trying to promote.
Okay, thank you. Rather than do any follow-up questions myself, I'm going to leave that to you all to do the follow-up. And Audrey, it's sort of a little bit of a process question, but actually following on from what John has said in terms of building an engagement with the stakeholders and making that alignment between incentives, behavioral change, and a desirability to move towards a more distributive system. Trying to get that in alignment is a very tough thing. And so my question to you is what sort of process do you envision to encourage that kind of stakeholder engagement that's going to help facilitate those shifts that in the regulatory structure are hugely difficult to get people to buy into?
Sure. Well, it is to me a holistic team element, and it does for us is going to begin with a state energy plan that we're all engaged in to lay out a vision for where we want the state to go. As an element of that plan, there are going to be roles, I think, for each of the agencies as well as, and from that perspective, I envision that our part is going to have to be looking at the regulatory structure we have in place today and thinking about what changes need to be made in that regulatory structure, tariff design, all the various elements to get us there. From that perspective, the department's process is most likely going to be very similar to what we've done with other restructuring processes where there'll be collaboratives. We'll invite people in to give us information. And the difference is that the way I've described it is the ecosystem for energy has changed, where when we did restructuring previously, it was, you thought about the independent power generators, electric utilities, maybe some interveners who might be interested in particular interests. Now we have other people, entrepreneurs, investors, understanding sort of the impact of how when we make decisions, it will influence the market. It's going to be important for us to hear from a lot more than what I say are the typical players who come to the staff. So I envision that we will hold essentially hearings. We'll invite different panels, almost like the technical conferences that we hold today, but just having them on discrete topic areas so that we end up hearing from folks that normally wouldn't approach the commission, because it's just as important for us to hear from those elements. And then out of that, we would expect, was our normal route, is that we would then ask the utilities that we do regulate to come in with plans to help us implement where we need to go. So those are sort of the pieces, but it will be an open process, and it'll be one where we take in a lot of information, because that's the only way, the best way to make decisions is to hear from a wide variety of folks and then come out with proposals on how we'll go about making the change.
Excellent. Thank you. Questions from the floor? It's not a silent crowd, I know that.
Can you hear me? All right, great. So I'll try not to be too broad in scope, but I think something that we all sort of realize is that the energy infrastructure we have today is...
Could you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. My name is James Shomar. I'm a student at Syracuse University, but I'm also the CEO of a company called Solstice Power, which I'll get to in a second. But the current infrastructure that we kind of have today, for all intents and purposes, is really kind of 130 years old. And there's a lot of negative consequences of that we're starting to realize. We don't have horse-drawn carriages anymore, or typewriters and that sort of thing, but we still have this sort of same basic structure. And as an entrepreneur or intrapreneur or startup, interacting with government, we've found certain barriers, and that's not as a criticism, but simply that we want to have forums like these where we can kind of collaborate and cause a drive towards that common goal of a sustainable future and energy infrastructure. And so, for instance, our company, we're developing a new type of solar power system that provides electrical, heating, and air conditioning from one unit for a third the cost of the current solar industry standards. And we've had a lot of problems on the prototype development side, for instance, where incentives are great in terms of deploying current technology, but have been struggling to develop new disruptive technologies such as ourselves, because language is often constrained, and I understand that there's a risk associated with that with public funds, and maybe that's where private can come in and help out as well. But it's still a barrier.
I don't want to interrupt you, but their time is limited. Can you get to your question?
Yes. So anyway,
you.
my point being is that, and I didn't mean to draw on too long. There are a lot of barriers in terms of creating this new infrastructure, which are perhaps larger or beyond, outside the box than we typically thought. And so, what ideas do you have that we can move forward, so we're not typically thinking in this kind of constrained box of it has to go through the grid, it has to go through a single utility and monopolized kind of system, and those kind of ideas? I know it's kind of broad in scope, but nonetheless.
I'm sorry.
I'm not sure any of us
acoustically,
understood the question.
Sorry, yeah, I was trying to keep it
May I
short.
recap?
But nonetheless, we kind of have, oh, I'm sorry, you go on.
Go ahead.
Answer the question.
So
Yeah, it is.
yeah. So let me just take that very quickly. So let me just, and I'll give you a fact. Right now, the average load factor in across New York is 47%, meaning that the grid itself is run highly inefficiently. It will change from utility to utility, but basically you have a lot of capacity that's unused. One of the things that we've done is we've never incented utilities to become more system-wide efficient. So one of the things we'll be looking at, for example, is say, how do you reward utilities if they integrate distributed resources better so the system itself becomes more efficient? What that does is it incents utilities. So rather than looking at it as a penalty or neutral, is we say, how do we tell the utilities, if you do this thing, that will end up in a much more efficient system, not only would you win the star on your head, but you'll make more money. And so their interests are aligned with your interests, are aligned with their customer interests. And the end point is we have a more efficient grid, which ends up being a more resilient grid and a more secure grid. So that's what we're talking about is these shouldn't be disparate. They should be aligned, and what we need to do is make sure we understand where the disparities exist and start eliminating them.
Yeah, and if I could just add also to that, I think that we talked before about how we have to focus on the customer bill. So part of what Audrey's talking about over time will have an effect on reducing the amount of capital that's put into the system by improving system efficiency. The other part of the bill, which will have a bill effect, both on the amount of capital that's involved in generation and the amount of capital that's involved in transmission and distribution. But the other part of the bill is how much energy people use, and so that relates to the customer side of the meter. And I think that we think that there is more value that can be obtained by customers if they could have more choice and we can draw on more innovation. And so I think we're thinking quite a lot about how we can create more of a pro-competitive environment around customers, and that part of the system which needs to be regulated and that part of the system which doesn't need to be regulated. So really, I guess the way we would think about this, and of course the devil's in the details of how it happens, and it's going to take us a while. As you say, it took us quite a long time to have the system that we have today, so it's going to take a little time to get to a different system, but the technology clearly exists now to start with the customer and work backwards, as opposed to the push model, which is what we had to have in an earlier age. And after all, that's how most industries have now evolved, starting with the customer and delivering the service to the customer.
I'm Jim McKnight, Summerhill Biomass Systems, and I have a short, very specific question that can be answered sort of yes or no.
At least we have a 50-50 chance of getting it right.
We could do 2 yeses on one.
The question is, at one point, as I understood it, there was interest in distributed standby power systems that would take care of some of the problems with balancing the load and the supply at various locations. And this, I expect, will be a larger problem as we use more and more solar and wind power. So the question is there still an interest in distributed, small-scale, standby power systems that, in my case, could be powered by biomass?
Powered by what?
Biomass.
Okay. Biomass. I think yes.
Yes.
Yes, yes, and yes.
Yes, and we're particularly interested in those where distributed solutions just aren't standby, but actually can provide services to the grid, which picks up what Audrey was talking about before, to the degree to which the standby systems or the distributed solutions can provide the ability to reduce the capital and improve the efficiency of the system, then we're even more interested.
Yes, over here.
Yes, thank you. My name is Rob Boyaziev. I work in the state government market for Johnson Controls. And my question's around some of the Build Smart New York initiatives and financing in particular, and just using the Department of Energy or the federal government as a model a little bit. So we're all intrigued, us market participants are intrigued by the notion of the $800 million, trying to make that go a little bit further. So I would ask if the panel would consider, at least in the federal government, there's an option to use some of what we call SRM funding, or Department of Defense earmarked funding, into energy efficiency to make the project go farther or leverage the project for a longer payback. So my question is a little bit around the NYPA program. Would the panel consider allowing those funds to be merged with private sector investment so the project could go either longer or make it a bigger investment?
Jill, do you want to?
Jill, do you want
Jill.
to? Jill. You want to?
So I think the short answer is yes, if we are staying with the short answers. But it depends on each project. We've got different customers who might have packages of incentives that they're putting together. But to the extent that we're able to increase the size of a project and the scope of that efficiency work that we can do, and not all under NYPA's $800 million, we're absolutely interested in exploring those.
There's
Another question?
There's one in the back, too.
Two in the back.
Lou Schick from New World Capital. All of you in various ways have talked about the centrality of the customer and doing a customer-focused redesign of the delivery system. And one of the things, and I know from the NRDC standpoint, and I know, Richard, you've done some of this yourself, defining the customer is not completely straightforward. If you're sitting in a big, tall building in Manhattan, the vast majority of important decisions that are going to get made about your local indoor environment are not made by the people who have to live with them. And so this concept that there are fragmented and split incentives and so forth, how do you fix the idea that the customer isn't really one person or one entity in designing these things? Because obviously customer-focused design is the right way to go, but with the exception, I know NRDC's experimented with some lease design and so forth, but have you thought about what you can do to make that better?
Yes. I think at two levels. First of all, the idea of more than a single point customer is actually relatively common in the marketplace, not just in energy efficiency in the built environment in a building with tenants. And the second, so there are approaches to dealing with that, and we would like to encourage market actors, but also NYSERDA itself to develop those approaches and advance propositions, value propositions that address the different participants in that multi-decision point customer. The second thing is that we can, we know we can change through demonstrations. We know that we can change some of those attributes. We know that advances in metering and sub-metering can change the availability of information in the domain over which people can make decisions. That's true both in multifamily and in commercial buildings. We know that you can you can change the institutional arrangements. It takes a little bit more time, but you can change the leases. You can change the ways in which tenants participate in the economics. And some of that is a slow build, but some of that you can actually address with some far-reaching institutional changes. We know that if you create enough demonstration projects, you will have people wanting more of the same. And why can't I have what those tenants over there had? So that we can change both, we can change the market over time, and I think we need to do that.
Lou, if I could add to this, I mean, I think that this is an example where we can try to get some of the rules right. We can do some demonstrations, but this is also where we're going to push more things back to the market, because I think the market has been really poor at customer segmentation. So in other words, when I hear the mush market or multifamily or residential, these are not market segments as marketers determine market segments. These are market classifications. Market segmentation is about customer buying behavior. And customer buying behavior is about, I'm not a marketer, but, we can imagine that some customers want it to be really easy for them. We know that there are some customers that are motivated by wanting to stick it to the man, they like independence. We know that there are some customers that are going to be very conservative and risk averse in their, in what they want to do. There are still customers that, never wanted to pry AT&T from their hands, right? Or that's why IBM was always the choice for so many years. We know in residential, in the residential side, it seems like comfort, it matters a whole lot as a motivator for some people. Or when somebody's going to have a child, the loser room in the house is the baby's room. So that's the time to market. So it seems to me that the industry needs to move much more in this area of trying to learn much more about how customers make buying decisions, both institutional or residential customers. And we've spent way too much time thinking about the decisions being made on a dollars and cents basis, as though everybody's a rational actor.
So thank you. I think that's a great way to end this conversation about rules and the tools and the markets. Our team has to meet a flight and head back to New York. So I want to thank them and all of you. And if you have additional questions, maybe you can grab them on the way out, right. Or some other means. But thank you very much, and thank you for coming today.
Thank you,